Hey, welcome back to Never Iron Anything Comics Podcast. This week, something of an experiment. We're going to be talking about artistic influences. In one corner we've got art, and in the other corner we've got writing. So, what is an influence? A tool, an inspiration, a crutch, or maybe a curse? Here to try and follow my twisted logic is comics writer, cartoonist, and now podcaster, Mr. Johnny Cannon. Hey, dude.
Thank you so much for asking me back on, Tony.
Well, we've done two of your podcasts, haven't we? You were doing them weekly at one point. So
yeah, that's true.
In full disclosure.
In full disclosure. Controversial name. Yeah. No one likes it. I'd asked two other people to come on in future, and honestly, the emails never get much further than, have you thought about changing the name of the podcast to Cannon Fodder? That sounds better. And I was like, for Christ's sake.
That is good.
It is quite good, actually.
Yeah.
That's the thing about it as well. Anyway.
Me and Falpy were on it a few times. We enjoyed it. It's good.
I'm thinking about having an anniversary episode where I invite
all the guests,
all the previous guests back on.
Oh, good. Hang on a minute. That's just me and him, innit? So you keep
lineup.
threatening to have other people on.
The thing is, I had such a good time both times.
We do have a giggle, don't we? I like the way someone, probably me, put the noise of a lady having sex on your podcast, and none of us mentioned it until someone wrote in and said, "Why did nobody acknowledge the fact that there was sex noises coming out?"
Was it you? Because you did blame Adam.
No, it was me.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I apologise.
I do remember the time just ignoring it.
Yeah.
And being like, just maybe because not knowing who it was, but also like just
move on.
Don't say anything, people won't notice.
Yeah. You ignored it so well. I thought maybe it hadn't come out on the mic or something. But
no, it did. It really did.
Now this comes from me boring you with something I wrote in my weekly blog this week about influences, and I sort of sent you an earlier version of it, didn't I, before I sort of rewrote it a bit. And it's something I wanted to talk to you about it, and I thought we'd start off, Mr. Cannon, by defining what we think an artistic influence is. I looked online. The impact that one artist's work, style or ideas has on another artist's creative process. Mm-hmm. Now, thanks to everyone on the Slack. We'll probably name a few of them as we go through, but I'm going to say it's kind of widened the definition a bit, and I've actually taken I named 3 on the Slack, but I've taken one out because I'm trying to apply myself to that definition. Mm-hmm. What would be your definition of it? Have you?
So I'm so wanky.
That's right.
So I used to work in a university a long time ago, and the way that I approached comics changed a few years ago because I actually started applying the way I'd been trained in kind of academic research to how I'd learned about comics.
Okay.
And the way that I think about influences would be thinking not just about learning your craft, like, so the methods, the tools, the techniques, so your methodology, but your kind of your ontology as well, which is a list of what you know, kind of, so like,
okay.
And that, but then it's the epistemology as well, so it's how you know what you know. And that's when I started to you're lying.
No, I'm being genuine. Epistemology is something I'm really interested in. It comes back. Do you remember when we used to on the ACP? I used to do that question, and I'd say, "Do you agree or not agree?" And that's very much the line I was trying to take with it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's because it's not just. So when I look at someone whose work I really like and kind of study it, I'll do the same thing I would do if I was writing a journal article or something where I'll go to the references of the journal article or the book, and go and find out why did they reference this, then go and read that article, and it's like it's one of the things actually I used to really like about that job, where it's a wee bit of a detective hunt.
That's what I've always said about you. Is one of the reasons I enjoy talking to you so much is you treat it as a study. I don't know anyone who studies so much about the act of putting your pen on a page. Well, no, but I'm not an artist. But for you, it's the act of, just that putting that pen on a page and moving it up and down is something that just is got that you've engrossed yourself in how and the whys and whens and everything.
So the reason why I found it useful to think about it in those terms, epistemology, ontology, and methodology, was because I would start thinking, and it's really when you start to study folk like Ditko and what makes him different than Kirby. And it's not to say who's better or anything like that. It's just a different way of approaching it. And I wrote a wee thing in my newsletter about how you've got these kind of, like, people will say about Kirby, he draws from the gut. He's a great instinctive. Basically, they're saying he's kind of almost like a savant, the way he draws, and the way he's described. And it's like, no, the guy's obviously a very, very clever guy and knows how a page works and knows about storytelling as well.
He's a very clever guy about the art, isn't he? I wish he'd been so clever about the financials.
Which is ironic, because when you look at him, he was one of the guys that set up studios pretty early on, Second World War. And but then again, how much of that's down to just bad luck or
how much is it maybe down to Joe Simon sometimes? He's kind of got that in.
Well, he apparently was a better businessman of the two. So, but it's interesting. That's one thing actually, and I guess we'll go on to that. Is I got interested in the history of this as well, just from reading interviews, and was trying to figure out. Sometimes it's not always clear who an influence is on your favourite artist, because there's surface influences, which are the technical side of it. So, for example, particular inking techniques, particular types of construction and drawing. But then there's almost the thought behind it.
Yeah.
So my eureka moment was literally
that
famous picture of Steve Ditko with the wee banner behind his drawing table saying "Think," and that was literally it. It's just like, it's so fucking obvious he's right.
Yeah.
You really need to think about this stuff.
There is a cheapness to the programmatical answer to why he had that, is because he was engorged in randomism, Ayn Rand. But it was more than that, isn't it? I don't think it was that. That's the easy go-to since the documentary about him, In Search of Steve Ditko. But yeah, right. Let me just. Sorry, Meg, on. You're going to say?
I was just going to say, it reminds me of the story about why he quit Dark Dominion, that Jim Shooter.
Oh, right. I've not heard that, I think.
Dark Dominion was the one where there was trading cards.
Yeah.
And I think it's maybe because Jim Shooter had noticed the 9-panel grid. You put the 9 panels together, a comic page, but that's 9 trading cards.
Oh, right. It's at the same time as Warriors of Plasm, that kind of period, wasn't it? Yeah.
It's a really clever idea. And they asked Ditko to do it, and he refused because I'm going to get this wrong. I think it was because he was an Aristotelian, and it was a Platonic ideal he'd identified behind the comics.
Fucking hell. Okay.
I just love that kind of.
Yeah.
And Jim Shooter, the way he tells the story, is just like he's staring at him blankly, like, Steve, whatever you want, just honestly, thanks for coming to me.
Yeah, I remember that period. I bought those. Yeah, I think still comic shops have got quite a few of them. Right, so let's split it up into 3 things. I'm gonna say no. Let's go first to we agreed we would name our 3. We'd name 3 main influences. I'm not being prescriptive here. They don't have to be your. We're not going to have to stick with them. But let's name 3. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna guess 3 of yours to start with. So I'm gonna say, everyone take a drink. Alex Toth, Alan Davis, David Mazzucchelli.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They're 3.
What were the 3 you were gonna say?
So I've got 4 who overpin everything, like, and that's just, and it's not to be difficult. It's just those are the 4, and that's what that kind of epistemological level for me. That's those 4, which is Harvey Kurtzman, Alex Toth, Wallace Wood, and Steve Ditko, and that's because of the way that they approached comics, the way that they made comics. It's not philosophical. It's just a particular approach. With Wallace Wood, for example, it's the famous quote about I'm gonna get this right. Is it, don't draw what you can copy?
Yeah.
Don't copy what you can trace. Don't trace what you can paste.
Yeah.
And it's not to. I think some people think, he's a hack. He didn't mean it literally. It's just a case of, you need to get the job done.
Yeah.
You need to do it efficiently. And if you think about it, even removing the kind of deadline aspect of it, there comes a point when you've got to basically finish a page. You need to stop working on it because you'll just keep messing it up. And that to me overlaps in a kind of Venn diagram with Toth, where it's a case of, boil it down, strip it back, and draw the hell out of what's left.
Yeah.
That those two things really are intertwined for me.
With the wood quote, I think people
Yeah.
confuse it now because they retrospectively look back on him as his whole life, and he's got that terrible reputation of just fucking living for booze towards the end. And I think it's kind of intertwined with that in a lot of people's minds, that he was being lazy because he was reliant on alcohol, living in a flat above wherever it was, had a handgun, this sort of thing. But I think it comes from before that, doesn't it?
I tell you, you're completely right, and I think it's as well because that was something he would say to his assistants in the 22 panels as well, which is a bit like Roy Crane's scrapbooks of here's a guide. If you get stuck, here's the things that you can do. These always get me out of trouble. These are get out of jail free cards, and I know from using it myself.
Yeah,
I mean it does work, but every one of those panels, comes from in fact, I would say 99% of them come from newspaper strips, particularly Milk Kniff.
Yeah.
Because again, that's who he learned from. Same with Kirby. If you look at Kirby's influence, take that back. Alex Raymond, Hal Foster, Milk Kniff, Roy Crane.
I read an interview literally.
Same names over and over again.
Yeah, I read an interview with Kirby, an old interview in Kirby Collector issue 93, where he says Kniff. They sort of push him a bit for influences, and he says, "Who did
Foster as well."
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. So they're yours. I'm going to say Martin Amis, Doug Munch, Pat Mills. They're the three I'm going with, and I think from a sort of it's not philosophical, but from a sort of separation kind of argument, I'm going to say that in artistic influence, there's these three areas which we can apply ourselves to as we maybe answer some of the questions. Stylistic choices, so you got stuff like silhouette, you got stuff like thematic choices. So for me, that would be Amos's choice to depict what he considered to be blue collar, criminal class, that sort of thing. And then you've got techniques, which is something I know you've thought about a lot. What kind of pen they used, how they do it, that sort of thing. So that I kind of think. That's what I kind of split up artistic influence into, those three. So you've got stylistic, thematic, and techniques. What do you think about that? Can you think about any other areas that it misses out on?
I think there's a tendency, like I think it works for drawing, I think it works for writing as well. When Scott McCloud's got that pyramid, and he talks about the transition between realism and cartoon realism. One of the things I'm more interested in is, and we've spoken about this a lot, and obviously when you're talking about your influences, it's beyond the world of comics.
Yeah,
I think you have to do that.
Yeah,
I think you've always got to have a broad, an eclectic range of influences. And the reality is, I think, is as you go through life, you don't have, unless you're Steve Ditko. And I don't think he was. I agree with you. I think the guy read a lot.
Yeah.
Rand was just someone that chimed to him. More than most in Aristotle.
Yeah, we move through life involving ourselves in different things, don't we?
You come into contact with new ideas and people all the time. And I think even though I've got those four influences, you're right. Alan Davis is a huge influence on me.
Yeah.
David Mazzucchelli is a massive influence on me as well. I think David Mazzucchelli, Steve Rude, and Alan Davis are the three best cartoonists to come out in the 80s with regards to style, but not necessarily in terms of theme or storytelling ability. I think it's Frank Miller.
Right.
So, and Chaikin as well.
Yeah. But then again, you look at Chaikin, I was trying to sort of find influences in interviews that people mentioned. And if you go to Miller and Chaikin, it's Adams, isn't it? They're the ones they always mention. Well, with Chaikin, it's Gil Kane as well.
Chaikin, it's Gil Kane, but that's like when you're saying Pat Mills, it's similar with Chaikin and Kane because it's there's a degree of mentoring in it as well.
Yeah.
Because obviously you've got a friendship with
yeah, we write together now, so yeah.
Yeah. So with Chaikin, it's Gil Kane, Wallace Wood, and Gray Morrow, because those
Yeah,
are
of
the folk
course. Yeah,
he
yeah,
assisted. But he also says, about Wallace Wood, exactly what you were saying earlier on. It's a cautionary tale because he saw what could happen, and so when you hear Chaikin in interviews, that he can maybe sound a bit mercenary sometimes, and he's just been honest. At the end of the day, he's had to make a living from it,
yeah.
and I think he downplays the level of talent he had, because I think American Flag is one of
Oh,
the
I
greatest
think so
comics
as
ever
well.
produced. I
Yeah,
mean, it's so influential, but I can in it, for me, I think it's really taken what Roy Crane did,
yeah,
put
interesting.
it in the
Yeah, yeah,
comic form
yeah,
to the next level, even down to the duotone, the adventure strip
yeah.
format.
That's a good point.
Ribbon Flag, is Buzz Sawyer to me. It's
Yeah.
just
So let's focus in a bit on you. So my first question, I've double banked it with how and why do you study these people. Let's just do how do you study them? What are you looking for when you look at them?
So I mean, I study everything I like. So
Yeah.
everything I see, there was
But I mean, do you look at a panel and think, yeah, I can
yeah,
see how he's laying that out.
yeah,
I'm going to lay it out
yeah.
in a panel similar. Is that, yeah,
No, not so much that. It's more a kind of at this point. So when I go back and did all the work and figured out how they, like, I will go over their work and read it again and again and study it, and like I've got the
I mean, you just
artists.
show me a Mazzucchelli,
Yeah.
I'm going to say influenced page. Certainly
Huh?
the top panel. Yeah, yeah,
Oh right,
yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah, that was a direct homage to Batman Year One, and that page is a
Right.
really good examples of. So it's not even just a case of when I read a comic. Sometimes I'll stop in a panel and I'll be like, I wonder how they did that. Like, just it
Yep.
blows my mind. I'm like, how did they do that? Or it's effective from a storytelling point of view. And this happens quite a lot where you don't necessarily stop at the page. You get this a lot in writing. When you get you come up with an idea, it's an amazing idea. Why has no one ever thought of that before? Oh, it turns out they had. You actually read in a comic
Yeah.
2 years ago,
Yeah.
and then you just not realised it's in there because you
Yeah.
read so much, and that is super common.
I think I
It's the
think
same thing that happens with drawing.
with writing, I think just before I forget, because we'll ramble on through this now. You bring up an interesting question there. Is about influence through writing, and I tend to find that something will spark an idea that I'll then continue to another
Yeah,
place.
yeah,
I got one the other day about the vividity of dreams and how it affects your mental process, and it got me
yeah.
really thinking about it. And I thought, fucking hell, that's really interesting. And it was, who was it said by? I think it was Dawkins said it.
Mhm.
And I was into podcasts of Dawkins being interviewed, who can be a bit of an old lady, can't he? But he said this thing about insanity: if your dreams are more realistic and more vivid than your waking life, it means you're insane. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. So I sort of started to take it elsewhere, and that's where the influence comes from me. And so I'm just going to put it back on you. Is that from an artistic point of view? You see, I don't know, you'll see Mazzucchelli doing a piece of silhouette work,
Mhm.
and you'll think, right, well, I can work in a silhouette. Is that how it goes, or?
So for that particular panel, it's just a panel that's seared in my head. It's so quite fit. And the thing is, when you look at it in the context of the comic, it's a really innocuous panel,
Yeah.
and he's doing that.
It's a scene
It's like
setting panel for me, the way it works on the top of the
it's
panel.
an establishing shot. It's an
Yeah.
establishing shot. It's running through the city, and it's intercut with scenes of James Gordon, and then you're seeing Batman in silhouette. And anytime I ever see where there's a delayed introduction of a character, it's at the start of Jaws. It's a slow build up. You do not see the shark,
Yeah.
and then in the reveal it hits you. In comics, the one that always stands out to me was when they introduced Steve Canyon, when Milt Caniff had stopped in Terry and the Pirates. He was launching Steve Canyon. This was a huge deal. He was in the front cover of Time. This was a
Right.
massive deal. The deal that he had with King Features, he owned that character,
Yeah.
and that was not common. He was an absolute superstar, not just in like translated comics and newspapers. He was selling millions of units.
And they were the governors, weren't they? King Features. They were the ones
Oh, aye.
who will make you a millionaire.
Aye.
Yeah.
But when he, I mean, you see their houses, like Raymond and that, and you're like, bloody, like Connecticut mansions and stuff. But when you see Steve Canyon been introduced, it's delayed. The characters are talking about him, you don't see him. You see the back of his head. You see the footsteps and stuff. And so that's something that I like doing in comics, and I think that's what Matt Sekeli was doing but he was doing it through a Tothian approach of showing the silhouette, because Batman has such a good silhouette.
Yeah.
And he's introducing the character, and then you do the Batman reveal, and he's coming out of nowhere, and he's just incredible force of nature and stuff. And again, for that character, the silhouette works well because he's a figure of darkness and comes out the darkness, and and he's into the light, and it's fantastic. So, and for me, I used that because I was reintroducing a character, and that character has a very specific silhouette in the cast of characters that I draw.
Yeah,
because he's got a tail. So that's why I used it running across the rooftops. I mean, if you look at the actual drawing, the shape of things, it's similar, but it's not like I traced it off because the figure works different.
Yeah, so it is exactly what we're talking
specific
about.
to Manchester, so it's but yeah, it's in there as an
influence. Yeah, I would say it's less than an homage. I would say it's an influence, not an homage. I would say.
Yeah. I mean, that is.
If there's a difference there somewhere, there's a line, isn't there? You cross when it becomes an homage. It's yeah.
But the way that page ends, though, is when I was. So there's it's a 4-tier page, and then the last tier, I wanted to do something different that Daniel Clowes does. Is, when you're reading a comic, and I was introducing characters for the first time, and it's like there's a kind of, it takes you out the comic for a second. It says, "This is Tony Esmond. He's a fun guy. He's a wacky character." Kind of thing. And you lift it out and you make it a bit poppy and a bit silly.
Yeah.
I wanted to do that, and so what I did was I used the framing from The Good and the Bad and Ugly, a movie one sheet poster.
Yeah. Movies come up a lot with people actually in the Slack. I know Jordan mentioned it and a couple of others. Yeah.
Huge for me.
Yeah.
So I'll do the same thing if I'm watching a film. If there's, particularly when it's talking head scenes, I'll look at the way it's shot.
Yeah.
And I'll look at the way, I'll pay particular attention to the way they move the camera around. And I think that's one thing that's crept into comics too much is, and Gabe Hardman talks about this, is we'll talk about when he's doing a talking scene, he'll always do it over the shoulder. That's because he's learned storytelling from films.
Yeah.
I don't like doing that. I do like moving the camera around, and this whole thing, it takes you out the, it takes you out the scene. In films, I don't think it does necessarily in comics.
I think you're right,
I like to move the angle round about, because there's certain shots that you can draw in comics that you cannot do in film, because you cannot physically get a camera into that space. You probably could now with a camera.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
But,
I see.
Because of the lighting as well, it doesn't work. Yeah. So, so I do watch films from that point of view and think about storytelling, composition, blocking, how that works, the way the interaction between the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. Chaikin talks a lot about the use of deep space in comics. So that was something I started thinking about when I did his paradigm course. He talked about meaning in the panel, like I keep this chest of drawers in the background, and I've drawn it straight on, a bit like a Wes Anderson thing, but that's there and it's prominent because that's where the art is. It's from Hey Kids comic, and then someone takes something out the drawer later on, or I think that's the scene where the character based in Gil Kane steals the artwork.
Right. Okay.
So you're seeing the background, the drawers with artwork in it.
Yeah, of course.
And goes missing. So it's Chekhov's drawers.
Yeah, exactly, isn't it? Yeah, exactly.
Hi.
You've got to establish that they're there so you can steal from them. Otherwise, it's a cheap shot. And I think that's one of the things that newer writers and artists in comics don't understand. They think they can just do this thing because they think it looks cool or whatever, but they don't set it up enough. Yeah.
But that's why you have to study, is to really understand how this works and understand where it comes from and why people did things a particular way. It's not good enough for me to know what to do or how to do it, when to do it. It's why you're doing it, because if you understand the why, you then understand the opportunity cost of what you can't then do.
Yeah.
But also the real estate and the page design means that you have to have a certain size of panel, and if you do that, it means you can't do something else. And as I've studied those guys more and more, the thing that I've lost is probably what's become known because the Image guys is the money shot.
Okay.
Which is, that big, the page you sell to a collector.
Yeah. So you think there's an expectation of that now in modern comics that you don't use because you're studying people who Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
It's boring. I have. It's interesting because the covers I'm attracted to are story based ones. That because that's a specific comic. I miss old movie posters as well. And it's not to say I'm stuck in the mud. I don't like new things. That's not true. I love new films. If David Fincher's got a film out, I am going to go and see it because I love
Right.
his work. Soderbergh, I usually love his stuff too. I get excited about that. I'm not a massive fan of um, some of the schmaltzy elements of Spielberg's work, but the guy's a master craftsman.
Yeah, he's
It's
made some good
same in
stuff.
comics.
Yeah,
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 same in comic. Well, he's 3 careers. It's ridiculous the number of films he's made.
yeah.
But it's
I'm
the
not. I'm
same in
not. I'm
comics.
not. See, people put Spielberg with the greats, and I think he's touched on greatness, but a lot of his films aren't. That's the way I look at him.
Well, I mean, you look at the latter part of his career, and the films he's made are incredibly accomplished.
Yeah,
And there's distinct phases in his career. There's films that he's made that I think um, you disagree with this, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones, The Temple of Doom, and Last Crusade. I think they look like shit. But then again, they're meant to evoke the old serial, so they're not meant to look amazing.
yeah.
That's part of it. I don't think they're particularly great either.
Temple of Doom is just a popcorn movie. I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree.
I think
And
the first one is the first one. I mean, it is just iconic stuff in it. But for me, imagine. I was thinking about this recently, actually. Imagine making Jaws as your first. I know we did Jewel before that, but imagine making Jaws as your first film. I mean, for
yeah,
fuck's sake, you make the perfect film right
yeah,
off the bat.
yeah. That is it. That is
I mean,
one
how
of
do
the.
you follow
I mean,
that?
I'm being a bit grumpy there because I mean, Coppola just made a fucking
Well,
terrible
it's same
film.
with him as well.
Yeah, and he also made that film about, was it with Robin Williams, about a kid growing up, being transported back into his body or whatever it is. There's a lot of, and even Kubrick made Eyes Wide Shut, which is
I've still not seen that actually. I've not seen a lot of Kubrick, but again, he's another guy that. I mean, talking about influences, so when you hear, or rather, when you read interviews with like really famous cartoonists like Kirby, Toth, Kubert, Frank Giacoia, Carmen Infantino, a lot of them would go to the pictures together.
yeah,
And the
they did, didn't
directors
they?
they talk about it's John Ford, Orson Welles, Kubrick comes up quite a bit,
Yeah,
particularly Doctor Strangelove. It's the same kind of directors. Alfred Hitchcock. The
yeah,
relationship between
yeah.
Alfred
He
Hitchcock
gets
and Milton
mentioned a
Smith
lot,
is
doesn't he?
really interesting
Yeah,
because you cannot tell. And the same with Orson Welles when they talked about Citizen Kane. A lot of stuff in that comes from newspaper strips.
yeah. I
But a
mean,
lot of stuff in newspaper strips comes from films as well. It's totally symbiotic.
the relationship with artists and films back then
Yeah.
is so different. It's unrecognisable compared to the Netflix addicted children we've got now. I think let's move a little bit away from film because otherwise we're going to get stuck on film.
Oh no, totally. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Now let's move into the next section. So, as I've been thinking about this a lot as a someone who I've been trying to think about my influence in comics, and there is that area that is irrefutably an influence on me, but perhaps I'd rather it wasn't. And for the one I'll quote, and what I'm talking about here is conscious and unconscious, but influence. And for me, if there was a writer who I've probably read the most of, it would be someone like Claremont, who I don't think is a great writer. I think he's had moments that just have been fun and been like great soap opera, and but he, having read probably at this point over 1,000 comics written by him, he's got to be an unconscious influence on me, isn't he? Do you find that works on you from an artwork point of view?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've obviously read, I don't know, a lot of Sal Buscema, a lot of John Buscema, a lot of John Byrne. I'm trying to think who else. George Perez. These sort of people who just put a lot of work out there.
Yeah. Oh, it's someone like it's interesting. I remember listening to, it was an episode of Stuff Said, and Greg Shiegel, the host, was interviewing Paul Azaceta, who was working with, I'm sure it was Paul Azaceta, he was working with Robert Kirkman, who's just doing Outcast. So
Okay.
you'd make it, career-wise, it's going to be a TV show, you make a lot of money from this, you've made
Yeah.
it. And I'm sure it was him, or maybe Ryan Otley, but I think it was him. And they said, whose career would you like to have? And he said, Sal Buscema.
Yeah.
Why is that? It's because he worked non-stop. A good career, he's respected, and he's a comic artist.
He
No
knows what
one,
he's
no
doing.
one, you'll find very few people that draw comics will ever have a bad word to say about
Yeah,
Sal
mate, it's the
Buscema.
same. I think I said recently.
Solid, absolutely
All I
solid.
want sometimes is Sal Buscema. You know,
Yeah, but
the,
so
that's
there's guys,
the
there's,
Spider-Man's, the Peter Parker Spectacular
oh,
Spider-Man stuff. It's great storytelling.
yeah,
The Defender stuff
I
he
mean,
did is great storytelling. Yeah,
yeah, I'm pretty sure he launched that title as well. So
yeah, he did. I
he's
think.
had two big
Yeah,
runs on it. No, he's great. I would say he's one of the. I mean, I wouldn't put him down as one of my definitive Spider-Man artists,
yeah.
but he is
Or
up there. It's like
or
John Romita
Hulk.
Jr. as well.
Yeah,
They're up there. Right? Hulk, I would argue he is him and Herb Trimpe,
right.
even more than Kirby. I would say.
Yeah,
But I mean, again, there's an age thing in that, and I think that goes back to what you're saying as well. Is when you're reading something in your formative years, I think it stays with you. Your favourite. So Alan Davis for me, and if you hear Ian Laurie getting interviewed, we'll talk about Alan Davis and guys of a similar age because that hit them when they were an early teenager and they were seeing that, and it was just amazing. I think probably guys that I've discovered later on, maybe like a Steve Rood that I didn't see when I was younger, and there was almost a more studious approach to it because I was
okay.
trying to get better at drawing. So when I'm looking at something, I find it easier to separate myself and study it from a kind of how did he do this, how did he do that. Whereas if it's Ditko and Alan Davis, I'll just start reading because I just love it so much, and it's great. The subconscious thing's absolutely there. There's things when I'm drawing something, either I'll see it myself or you or someone else will say to me, "Oh, that looks like," and I'm like, "Oh yeah," and it's not been on
Okay.
purpose. It's just something that has sunk in, and I think that's maybe where something mechanical like drawing hands or ears, or a certain flourish in a nose. But there are some times where I draw noses in a particular way of construction, which comes from probably reading How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way,
Okay.
looking at things like John Buscema in particular, Jack Kirby. Like they would always do that line, like so one holding line on one side of the nose, particularly for women. They won't draw both sides of the nose
Yeah.
because there's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
as a light in it, because it looks too much and it's ugly in a woman's face.
Yeah.
You want a woman's face as clear and open as possible when
Yeah.
you're
There's a lot of
drawing
cartoons who give
it.
very little service to
Two
noses. Isn't it? Yeah.
nostrils,
On a woman.
two
Yeah. Yeah.
nostrils
Yeah.
sometimes. Aye,
Yeah.
aye. Whereas in a man, you want that strong nose, so you'll draw more in it. You'll give it a dent as well to emphasise the masculinity. Maybe he's been a bit of a fight. He's got the Marlon Brando kind of
Yeah.
Roman profile. So some of that's subconscious and some of it's learned.
Can
Um,
I ask you to? Is it both subconscious now or unconscious? But is it instinctual? Has it arced into the instinctual now? And I'll make that
yeah.
argument that people don't read enough comics now before they launch into, especially writing. They launch into comics, and what you're talking about there is instinctually learned.
Yeah, muscle memory. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
the mechanics of drawing something definitely, because um, it's, it's different when I'm actually doing it. So it's quite hard to kind of try and reverse engineer because it's the
Yeah.
right
Yeah. I
hand
get you.
draw. But there's times where I'll sit down to draw something. So I think about it. I approach it more as a writer, I suppose. I want this from this scene. And that's usually when I want to hit particular emotional beats.
Right.
But then there's times where the kind of gesture and the character, like the way they're standing or whatever, just comes out from the way I've drawn it. And that then, because I do my lettering as well, so I can change my script. I don't write a script.
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing. It's very well thought out. But I won't have a script. I'll write down notes to Mars about what they're going to say. Sometimes I do actually write down, but I always move away from it because I polish it when
Okay.
I'm writing it. That's my editing process. But there's sometimes like when I'm drawing it, I'll be like, do you know what? I'm gonna draw a nose differently. I'm gonna draw my hands differently here. I don't know why I've done that. It just feels right. That's the instinct. That's the instinct to change it. The muscle memory is where it's become like, say for example, it's like the Jack Kirby thing. If you like a man's hands, steal his hands. So you draw hands like that. You copy someone's hands. You keep drawing it, and eventually you just draw like that. That's the way you draw hands from now on.
He's known for his hands, isn't he, as well? That's the thing. Yeah.
I'm drawing 2 left hands and stuff like that.
Okay, that is interesting. All right.
So there's a difference between, for me, the muscle memory
and
the instinct, because there's I know what you're saying, but
I'm always more so saying the language.
The writer's instinct as well is different.
Yeah, because we know that when I first came to write my first comic, I'd been reading comics for decades at that point, and there was no real internet back then to look at how to write a comic. There was very little out there. I think the magazine Write hadn't come out at that point, but I understood I'm not saying it was perfect, but I understood the way that a comic works because I'd read so many, and it was an instinctual. I knew that there had to be the page turn. I knew who was speaking. I knew how much there would be in each panel. I knew how to move to action, being wider on the screen, on the page, and stuff like that. And I think sometimes we miss that in comics. That now that the people who are just jumping into it don't understand the dynamics of it sometimes. And I think that goes for writers, artists, and editors these days.
I think there's 2 things that have changed that.
Right.
I think. So I think you're absolutely right. It's the language element of it, and I just think there's 3 things. There's the language element of it. There's a consumption element of it. It's the way people consume comics, the way people consume culture now. Okay. Shorter attention spans, shorter products. Which is not always related, so it's like, either the restraints of the size of the media file or the restraints or constraints and printing costs or paper costs.
Screen shape.
Which is interesting because at the same time, you've got, the tweets, what is it, 140 characters, TikTok, whatever length of time it is, Instagram Reels, whatever length of time it is, comics, 24 pages, 22 pages, 20 pages shorter. But then you've got films getting fucking longer and longer and longer, and it's like 4 hours long. But TV series as well have been treated like this is a 13-hour film.
Yeah.
Or like a 30, I mean, it used to be 25 episodes like in network TV.
But like with Magnum PI and Star Trek Next Generation, it was a story per episode as well. Yeah.
So if you were to look at the actual length of episodes versus now, where it's like an hour and a half, it's however long it has to be. There's a degree of flab in there.
Yeah, I get sick of that, by the way.
I do.
I was sitting there watching. My missus was watching Succession, and we got to the last one, and it was an hour and 37 minutes. I'm like, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. But the other thing is, for me specifically, is when you're talking about page turns. So I was thinking recently about, because I've done newspaper strips format in my comics sometimes, and I like doing it. And that for me was something I had to learn how to do because it's so different. And I was thinking about what is the difference, and the difference is when people talk about influences in comics, like who are the main influences, and people talk about Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and I've been learning a lot about comics. I'm not trying to upset you. Jack Kirby is not one of the greatest influences in comics. He's just not, because you can see where he's got it from, and it's most of it is coming out in newspaper strips, and that's because of how he came up at the age of 14. Working in newspaper strips, and that's what he wanted to do. The big differences between doing a newspaper strip and a comic strip and a comic book is the language is all there in comic strips. The difference is and the stuff about you go from like full figure shots to medium shots. Roy Crane did all that. And Buzz Sawyer. That's where that comes in. And then the thing about the splash page, the half splash page. Hal Foster was doing that in Prince Valiant. That's not a comic book thing. The difference is, you're right, it's a page turn. That's the difference.
Okay.
Because it's more than one page. So you think about Prince Valiant. Prince Valiant was a one-page, oversized comic page. So your page design, that half splash goes into EC Comics and stuff, and then evolves into the splash page because it's quicker to do. So you can earn more money. Drop much quicker. You're drawing bigger. It's the page turn. That is the single biggest difference, and that is the thing now. I think that is really difficult in comics is if you're reading in Marvel Unlimited,
Yeah.
if you're doing assisted view, there are no page turns.
I wrote a thing on this about 8-9 years ago about the whole.
It's not comics.
People aren't understanding, and it's changed completely. I specified that page where Midnight falls and hangs himself in the Master of Kung Fu, where they're fighting on the crane, and it's so different. If you're reading it panel by panel, it's just absolutely a different scene.
It's a different. I would go as far to say it's almost a different medium, and it puts more emphasis in the single image.
Yeah.
Whereas the page has not been designed to be seen as a single image, and that's something. So that's something that's instinct. Going back to your point, that's something that's very instinctive to me, is knowing how an overall page works and the overall panel works. I think that must. I'm assuming it must be one of the hardest things to learn. It's not something that I've particularly studied. And I don't know if I'm good at it. I mean, I'm assuming I'm all right at it because it doesn't look like a mess when I'm drawing. But it's something that's there from just reading so many comics. I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, man. Yeah, cool.
You didn't when you came to write a comic strip. You just somehow knew how to do it.
Yeah, well, I think. Well, let's move on because that leads us nicely into. We've done stylistic choices. We're going to move in a little bit into thematic choices, and do your influences lead you into the subject area of your comic? So there's sort of, you've got, I know there's a little bit of Captain Britain in there, there's a little bit of, Marvel UK in there, and there is, I feel like you're almost in the same universe as Captain Britain Monthly or something like that.
Yeah, Warrior. Definitely.
Warrior,
but there's a love of David Lynch, like Twin Peaks, massive amount of Twin Peaks.
Okay.
David Fincher films. I mean, I love crime fiction, like James Elroy. It's so fucked up, this stuff. Ross MacDonald. Ross MacDonald's one of my favourite writers. Raymond Chandler.
Yeah.
I love detective fiction, which is why in the last comic I did, which I think was the one that I think I probably approached most of the, just doing it for fun, but actually setting out, here's a story. I'm going to make this individual bit of work my graphic novel.
I'm not saying that word.
No, but did approach it that way of like I want to tell a complete story, and it's always going to be detective fiction. The first comic I started drawing started off as a detective comic, and I get bored, drew a giant robot in it, and it turned into a superhero comic. That's what happened.
Yeah. So you're combining your literary and cinema loves with your comic loves in your current series.
Superheroes are easier to draw because you don't need to worry about the folds of clothes. You're essentially drawing naked people with no genitals.
Essentially, that's it, isn't it? Yeah.
That is it.
Yeah.
If you've got a cape, you've got to worry about that. I don't really have any characters with capes. But I like drawing, as I've got better at drawing, I like drawing people in normal clothes. I like drawing houses. I like drawing cars. I love drawing backgrounds. I love drawing the interaction between people and the environments and that deep space thing, and figuring out how, putting a foreground element in, and just when to strip it right back, like the technical side of it, I love doing. The reason why I'm still doing this is just the love of the characters, really, more than a love of the genre.
Okay, interesting. So if someone said to you, I want you to do a comic for us, but it's got to be Dungeons and Dragons themed, would you, if you did it, would there be a fucking detective in it? Would there be some rooftop action in it and that sort of thing as well? Which
if I was writing it,
you can, if you're writing, you can work that in somehow. Do you? Would you?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't, because that's going back to one of the things you dislike a lot, which is where you try and put your own thing. You try and put your overbearing interests into a comic, so all your characters
I think I possibly
same.
I think I possibly interrupt, but I think I possibly dislike that for established comics, established characters where people do it.
Right, okay.
I think if it was a new product, I think I'd be okay with. Trying to think of something now, but if there was a new product, I think I wouldn't mind it so much. Unless they were trying to put themselves in it, I think that might get up my nose, possibly. Yeah,
but there's a touch of the. We've spoken about this before. A touch of the Jim Woodrings about the way I work, where I don't know why I'm doing stuff. It's just happening. So it's just like the story, and I don't know if it's come from some idea, and then the idea just unravels in your head as you're walking about. You're in the shower or you're taking a dump.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is you're doing, you're thinking about something else, and all of a sudden the story's gone somewhere else, and then you write it down. So you're not making it up; it's coming out of you. I don't know how that works. and I don't know where that comes from. It's just that's what has to happen, and that happens when I'm drawing a page as well, which is why when I mentioned the page earlier on and did the good, the bad, ugly thing, was that page sat for 2 days and I could have finished it, but it just didn't feel right. What I'd got down, because I did thumbnails for the page, and then when I was coming to draw, it's like that's not quite right, and I suppose this is where the experience comes in to sit alongside the instinct or the studied stuff. Is just I know it's fine to step away from the page, and because I don't have a deadline to hit.
Yeah.
I have a full-time job. I do this when I can. That's the advantage of doing that, is I can step away. I don't have that pressure. If it doesn't feel right, I don't have to do it.
When you step away from the page, do you ever have a floating head of me just going, when are you going to finish this fucking comic, Johnny? I like to think that I'm or Falpy or someone,
No, there was if you want to be serious about that, I remember there was an episode of Awesome Comics podcast, and Dan is the one that keeps bringing this up, and it's because he's a graphic designer in his day job, and he starts all these people that miss their fucking deadlines, mate, you need to get it done in time. And I'm just like,
yeah, but you haven't got a deadline.
I feel so guilty.
But you haven't got one, have you? That's the thing.
I do when I work with other folk, and there's been time where we've spoken about this. I missed a deadline for you and felt terrible, but it's just that's just the way it is sometimes. No, I know, but it's true that someone's relying on you, and it was the same in Transylvanian Nights was the one that put me off, because I had to ink that entire comic and draw something about 12 pages over the course of a Kickstarter whilst doing commissions for people.
Right.
And that was with a newborn baby.
Right.
And it was just the way things worked out. It's just one of those things. It's no one's fault or anything like that. It just happens sometimes. You need to push through. But making comics, I changed the way I approached it, because it's not for money. It is not to. I mean, I'd like to make I always want to make as great a comic as I possibly can. But it's for fun. It's for the love of it. And it's because it's something that I'm compelled to do as well. It's.
Yeah,
so I don't have to do it for money. I can't afford to lose money on it. But that's not it's not an economic imperative that drives me.
Yeah,
so
no, me neither. Yeah, that's the benefit we have of doing it the way we do it, isn't it? Yeah. No. Okay, right. Let's move on to the third section, and then I've got a big question for you. So the third section is techniques, and I've kind of decided that's stuff like the way you do it. So is there anyone who you've read about who's been an influence on you? I know at one point you were talking about drawing with a feather. Am I right in saying that? A quill. I'm going to say a quill. Let's say a quill instead.
A crowquill's pretty much a fountain pen.
Yeah, okay.
It's just the nib. You get different types of quill nibs.
I know, for example, people who read about Sienkiewicz sometimes use a toothbrush or something like that. And
I use a toothbrush. Yeah.
Is there anyone who's been an influence on you that has led you down the road of thinking, I'm going to get that kind of dip pen, I'm going to get that kind of Kuretake pen? No?
Yeah. So I use. I don't know what I meant. That's not. In fact, you do as well. The crow quill I bought. I'm going to show you my inking tools. Sorry,
okay, that's fine.
So these are not all my inking tools. These are the ones I use most often. See these? This is
two mugs worth.
Big mugs stack. Yeah. So my other inking tools are all in my wife's old makeup box, which is. So this stuff all in here, which is huge, big makeup box, which is filled with stuff. And what else? I've got a lot of protractors.
I keep sending you. How many protractors I sent you now? I think it's 4, isn't it? I'm going to say 4. I almost sent you one the other day. I saw a new one.
10 in total. A couple of compasses, because you got me a compass and already had one.
That's right. That's a good idea.
French cuffs. I like using French cuffs.
Yeah.
But the crow quill I use and that you use, because I got you one, is one that I read about. It was Zoe Thorogood. It's talking about an interview. And I looked at it and I was like, actually, that's got a really good grip on it, because I hold a pencil and a pen quite funny. I read a lot of interviews. I got the Comics Journal Digital Archive, and there's particular people I'll go in and look for, but I'll also read the rest of the issue, and I'll pick up techniques, and I started doing my newsletter to write down. So that's almost
great newsletter, by the way. Everyone sign up. Yeah, it's a great newsletter, mate. Yeah. Really good.
I've also got a wee black book here, which is got inking tips and stuff in it, and that's because I met Eric Larson, and he was talking about, he reviewed the comic I'd done at the time, And he went through, really studied it. He said, "Oh, you know how to tell a story. It's a good start. Maybe think about when you're inking. Don't Your background's too detailed, and it's the foreground figures are merging in with it. So maybe leave some kind of white space around it. Really good design stuff. So things like that, I'm always picking up and looking for specifically in interviews. You're right though. Bill Sienkiewicz, Alberto Breccia, Sergio Topi are people that I specific techniques that I look to do. Like, so for example, I know that when there's a particular type of line I want to get for either for the mood in a scene or to do rain, I'll use razors. So I use razors quite a lot with ink or gouache. I'll use a toothbrush for a splatter effect. I will. I've got a stippling technique that I learned from Frank Bellamy that I'll use when I want, again, a particular mood, or I just want to do something a bit different. I've started using biros quite a lot.
Yeah, maybe you saying that to me. Yeah, did that come
really
from someone? Was that someone who mentioned it, or
it was? I'd seen Jim Rugg had been doing a lot of ballpoint drawings, and he did that Shaolin cowboy cover, and it was beautiful. But also, I remember one thing when I used to. So when at school, I used to draw everywhere on the desk, on my jotters. Everything was covered in drawings. My notebook for work, it's not so bad now because I've got that outlet outside of work. But I always know it's this part of my hand, like the flesh part of my palm, was always blue.
Yeah, like, the karate chop bit is always got ink on it. Yeah,
isn't it? That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And but that smear you would get in the page, I really liked as well. And just the shading you can get with a biro, you're still getting that kind of specific line, but you can hatch with it and cross hatch with it really, really well, and it's really faint. But then when you scan it in, you can ramp it up.
Okay.
So it's just a good thing for going over. So what I'll actually do is I'll scribble quite a lot, for certain lines. Like when I was studying Topi, I noticed that you'd have these nonsense lines for wind. And so I was looking at that in a page for Going Underground. There's a scene that's quite sinister, and I was like, do you know what? I'm going to use that kind of weird wind thing he's got. It doesn't make any sense. It's I don't know if it's impressionistic or expressionistic. It's just fucking weird. All these nonsensical lines. And Hugo Pratt does that too. Yeah,
that's interesting to me because we own the same books because I think we bought those Toppy books around the same time together. And and obviously, there's the people that I recognise in your work. I can see the Miller and the Toth and the Mazzucchelli and all these sort of people in it. But I'd never have put him down. And
that massively.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. And I should have thought of it before. And I was trying to combine it with the question that I did a big Google search of finding comics artists and who they said they're influenced by, and it's the usual stuff. It's like is it Jim Lee is influenced by John Byrne? Well, we can all see that. Everyone knows. But the one that I was interested in, it was Art Adams. It was influenced by Serpieri, and I thought, I wouldn't get that, and it's what he's getting from him. And this, I mean, I can see Marini being influenced by him, but I'm not sure I see Art Adams being influenced by him. But interesting.
But again, that's going back to the surface level influence, and then
it is. That's just me.
Because it's even down to the way. So there's a physical aspect to drawing there's a physical aspect to writing as well. But I think there's more of a thing. So there's a habit side to this, or a ritualistic side to writing and drawing. And for the writing, it's from reading interviews with writers. It's like, I'll go for a coffee, I'll go for a walk, I'll write in my study. There's this particular space to be in.
It's like David Mamet's writing in restaurants. It's similar, isn't it? He's got a book called that. Yeah, and I get that completely. Yeah.
But for drawing, it's more physical because it's the way I hold a pencil. It's the way I hold a brush. And for me to get a particular effect, I have to change the way that I hold the pencil, hold the brush. So there are times when I'm drawing something, I will make a fist with my pen and I will draw with that because I'm going to get a different line. There have been times where I can't remember what I did it on. I was drawing with my left hand because it just wasn't. I just wanted it to look fucked up.
Right.
It's not just changing the tool,
Yeah.
it's changing your complete approach to doing it.
Mate,
There
this
are
is what I
things
say about you all the time. I just interrupt you. You put more thought into a page of a comic than anyone I know. Genuinely.
the
And
frustrating thing is it's
I'm
not
not in
necessarily
everyone's
better.
heads, obviously. Sorry?
It's the frustrating thing is it's not necessarily better. You
Well,
can't actually see the thought that's going into it.
you do think so much about it. And it leads to the big question. So how long are we going? We're going almost an hour. So this is the big question that is the one that I sort of warned you about that I sort of hinted at in the introduction is, am I seeing the real Johnny, or am I seeing Johnny and his influences? And I'll put that another way: are the influences there? This is going to be a black and white question for a nuanced answer, I'm sure. But are your influences handcuffing you to a style?
Yes, they did, and I think it's a really good question. I think it's in comics, it's one of the best questions I've ever been asked, and I really do
Okay,
mean that.
thank
I
you.
think it's the biggest thing, and that's going back to the point I'd made about epistemology, ontology, and methodology. That was the thing that freed me. I
Right.
mean, I find it very, very difficult looking back at early United comics I did in Transylvanian Nights because I was trying to draw like Alan Davis, and I'm not Alan Davis.
Okay.
You know, he's a one. I love his work. I think it's beautiful, beautiful work.
Mm.
There are
Agreed, man.
there are specific things I will draw like Alan Davis, like back to technique thing. I will draw a bird's eye view from a 3/4 angle, so tilting it.
Okay.
I will draw, because I've reversed engineered the way Alan Davis used to draw Captain Britain's back, and then he foreshortens the figure. So you see the legs, so
I
it's,
know.
it's like two wee cylinders, it's an S curve for the back. And for women's bums, from the same angle, I draw like Alan Davis because.
He does draw great women's bums. He is.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
brilliant, brilliant breasts as well, brilliant breasts as well. And that's from Captain Britain issue 13.
All right.
It's a very specific panel. I could go in my cupboard right now, pick it out, and that is what I will always draw them like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter the body shape because that's a mechanical thing, and I can do that. I know that every time, if it comes, doesn't matter what side, because that's the thing that changes as well. And this is something I really struggle with. It's very like when you've been playing five-a-side football. I know you're a massive football fan.
Big footy fan, me. You know.
Big,
Well,
big football fan.
I bought this shirt when I was with you after the green
It
hoops.
still makes me laugh. You're so proud. What the fuck are you talking about?
I just did it to make you proud of me. That's why I bought it. Yeah.
It's not even is it not the right strip. It's not a football strip. It's literally a tracksuit fucking top.
Anyway, yeah.
So this, some man, really. So one of the things I used to get intimidated by was when I started. So it's quite funny. You know the famous story about Alan Davis when he started drawing Captain Britain. He thought he drew the actual size. He didn't realise it was reduced.
Right. Yeah. He was drawing it in the back of vans and stuff, wasn't he? He was working in.
He's pretty much drawn at A4.
Yeah.
And that's why you look at his early stuff. You're like, it's a bit rough. But then he's getting so much better. It's like someone's actually said to him, "You draw bigger, and then it's reduced. It looks better." So it was the same when I first started drawing. I got my sizes mixed up, and when I started drawing my first comic, which I found, I'll show you actually at the end of this. I'm going to put it in one of my newsletters. It was a character called Kurt Beaver, who's in my new comic that I'm making just now. He's a character. His name's now Kurt the Beaver because it just made me laugh more. And but I was drawing in A2,
right?
Because I'd read it. You draw two up, and I thought, well, 2 times A4 is A2. No, it's not. It's A3. So it's like the first time I stepped onto a full-size football pitch to play for a team, and I was playing up front. I was like, "Fuck me, I've got to run
Massive.
so far."
Yeah.
Exactly the same feeling when you draw a comic page the first time.
Yeah.
And when you as well, when you sit down to write a script, I'm going to write fucking 20 pages. See me now. I'm on page 87 of my new comic.
Right.
I know when I hit page 100 how fucking good that's going to feel because there's certain milestones make a comic. So you get into 10 pages, like, fucking 10 pages. See when you're so deep into it, it becomes about, it's like doing a PhD or something. It becomes less about inspiration. It's more about perspiration. It's about the dogmatism of really sticking with it. And it's the same when you approach a big page, whether it's a blank bit of paper to write a script or to write dialogue or even a tiny word balloon. When you're trying to fill that word balloon and it's just the words aren't coming, and you've trapped yourself at that point because the panel's a certain size, the word balloon's a certain size, there is that word limit.
Yeah. For me, it's a jigsaw. It's working your way out of it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. So the handcuff thing is absolutely real. I managed to liberate myself from trying to draw like Alan Davis.
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't draw comics for years, and that's what I wanted to do when I was a kid. That was my life goal, to do that. And I stopped doing it. I got Excalibur. It's now called the Swords Drawing, but it's just Excalibur Special Edition. I got that, would have been 86. It was the same year as Killing Joke, because it came out the same month in AKA, because I taught my friend into get Killing Joke, and I got that. And I read it and I burst into tears because I knew that I could not draw as well as Alan Davis. It was beautiful. And I still think it's one of the most beautiful comics he's done. Paul Needy inks. Christy Shield does the colours. Right. Beautiful. It's beautiful. I think it's kind of watercolour, like almost colours. It's beautiful. And I told him that when I met him.
Wow. Because you got on well with him, didn't you? You really...
Oh, he was a lovely man.
I remember you rang me on the way back to your bed and breakfast, didn't you, going, oh my God, this has been like the best.
I was crying. I was crying when
I can understand that, man.
I was so moved. It was
I had the same. I had the same when I was meeting all my heroes at Heroes last year, and I was walking away from them with Cliff, and I had to say, you got to give me a second, Cliff. I'm like, you
feel like a wee boy.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Yeah.
They can see that, and the thing is like, so when I told him the story about Marvel Superheroes 280, and I just took him one comic to sign, and that was the first work of his ever read, and I explained to him, I said, look, this is the first work he's ever read. I'm not going to come up and take the piss and give you a host. Can you sign this, please? It really mean a lot to me when he signed it. And I said, look, to be honest, that's not my original copy. And he's like, all right. And I said, because when I was a wee boy, I did an upset comic and did a big shit. And I begged my dad, look, can we not throw away? Can we just clean it? And my dad's like, no, it's going in the bin. And he couldn't stop. I said, should have told you that. I said, no. And then he told me a story of finding a Flash comic in a fence. He was a kid and took it home, and it stank. And he hid under his bed. His mum's like, what's that smell from your room? And threw it out, and he was gutted. And we're both sitting there just dying of laughter. He's a lovely man. It was
nice guy.
It was amazing. But the handcuffs thing, though, so when I started really studying, like, it was that, honestly, it was seeing that Ditko photograph, and it was for a podcast we were doing together.
Yeah.
I'd really get into Toth.
One of my favourite episodes, that man.
Together.
Yeah.
I'm so ignorant of him, and then learned a lot about him. I'm obsessed. Really getting into Kurtzman after doing the Paradigm course with Shaking, because he talked about Rubble being, a perfect comic story.
Yeah, I was saying to Zach Cahill about Kurtzman the other day.
That fucking
amazing. Yeah.
He is. So for me, I wrote this in a newsletter. For me, if you're looking at the greatest influences of comics in terms of informing the language of comics, in terms of the importance of the people who learn to draw like them, and you see it in their early work, it is, I mean, you can rank them, it probably is Milton Caniff, because it's even European comics, Mobius, it's Milton Caniff. You see early Blueberry, it's Milton Caniff.
Right.
And then it's Alex Raymond for the penmanship. It's Hal Foster for the quality of illustration, but it's Roy Crane for the storytelling and everything. It's unbelievable. I mean, it really is unbelievable.
I mean, people need to go back and read it.
You don't get Milk Caniff without Noel Sickles and Chiaroscuro.
Yeah,
you just don't. All the lighting, all the cinematic stuff.
I thought we talk a bit about that, but yeah, the thing is, people don't. I mean, I opened the piece I wrote about this on the Substack this week with I often use, so we get an artist on the show on the ACP, and normally sometimes they're chatty. If they're overly chatty, they're a bit too prepared sometimes, and some of them just, you need to draw it out of them a bit sometimes. You need to get them chatting, and artists love nothing more than talking about who they've loved and who's influenced them, sort of thing. And more often than not, these days, it will be Image Revolution, and I'm like, you wouldn't have him, you wouldn't have Larson, you wouldn't have Liefeld, you wouldn't have a lot of those guys if it wasn't for Kirby, you wouldn't have Kirby if it wasn't for blah blah blah. It's like that. But they don't know anything before that.
The funny thing,
and there's a refusal to know about it, I think, sometimes. Yeah.
The manga thing as well. It's huge.
Yeah, manga's massive now. Massive, mate. Yeah. If I hear about Ito one more time.
Yeah, but if you look at manga and you look at history, particularly the post Second War history of Japan,
Oh,
where do
no.
people think the influence was coming from for manga?
Yeah, it's coming from
It
GIs.
was newspaper, American
Yeah.
newspaper strips.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But then, so anyway, you track all that back, and you look at Kirby. I was looking at early Toth and Hawkman, early Cuba, early Kirby. They're actually quite similar.
Okay. Yeah.
And that might be because that happens sometimes where if they're working in studios, they've been asked, they're ghosting, so they've been asking to draw purposely like someone else. But they're all very, very young. And I think it's because, and I've heard this before, Jesse Ham, who's did this, he died a few years ago, and he's written this essay in Toth, which you can still get online. I think the proceeds go to his widow and their family.
Okay.
It's only $5. He had this theory that Toth had done the famous artist course in cartooning
Right.
at a certain period of time. I think it's the early 50s, and that's when he becomes Alex Toth.
Okay.
Because he's almost a bit Kniff-like, and so you've got that Kniff school.
Comes
Frank
up
Robb.
so often, that course, doesn't it? We hear about it when
There's
you
two.
do a study. All right.
There's two big courses. There's one I've got here, which is the Charles Landon course, the Landon School of Illustrating and Cartooning.
Right. Oh, yeah. You got
one,
that the other day, didn't you? That arrived.
I did a wrote about
yeah,
it.
Yeah.
But it's stuff like this, and I know this is terrible for a podcast, but it's.
Oh, that's beautiful.
We've got the Loomis instructional books. But those are two courses, and you'll see it in interviews with Jack Kirby, Alex Toth, Milton Caniff did the Landon one,
Right.
which is why I got it. And I think it was originally. So this is the 1922 facsimile edition, but it was like from 1912 or something. So there's a lot of stuff when you go right back, and like in the UK it's a bit different because it's like Punch and all that stuff. Ali Sloper.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, it's newspapers, it's mass media, and it's a transformation of mass media, which has become niche. So anyway, I went off on a tangent. So the other person I would argue out of comic books to those founding fathers of the language, and Winsor McKay is another one I put in there as well, just in terms of it was incredible what he did. It's Harvey Kurtzman.
Okay.
And again, people can say, Jack Kirby's, but I don't think. And I'm not arguing about it. It's just he's just not. I mean, I'm not saying he's not good. I'm not saying he's not great. But in terms of greatest influence, he's just not, because he did not come up with that.
Yeah. I think it's worth mentioning here that we're mostly circling in on American comics. There are people who heavy influences on people in British comics as well, which we won't talk about that now because I'm doing a podcast in a couple of weeks with Alan and Eamon, and we'll be talking about it then. So just let me just mention that.
Frank Bellamy's name's going to come up a lot in that.
Yeah, and also some of the humour guys.
Oh,
I don't think there's
Leo Baxendale. Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone better than those guys. Genuinely,
two humour artists for me. But I was just thinking about it is Leo Baxendale, Dudley D. Watkins, but I don't think he's not as funny. Baxendale's, it's
amazing.
Just so weird.
Yeah.
But Ken Reid as well. I think
just, they're the two for me.
Sweeney Todd, oh my god, it's unbelievable.
And hold your thought, because next week we'll be talking about someone who I think's influenced by those people. So let's just go through some of the thread of. I asked the guys on the Slack for some of theirs. Al Henderson said his influence was Charles Schultz, Scott Adams, the early Dilbert years, and sometimes silly dad joke nonsense like Tim Vine. That's great. I love that. Ian Matthews said perennials are Eastman and Laird and the UK weeklies. Currently in the revolving door of influence are Stan Sakai, Robert Kirkman, and Greg and Fake, who we had on last week from the Santos Sisters.
Oh, Santos Sisters is brilliant.
They're great guys.
Really
Simon sent a very interesting reply to the Substack this week, where he talked about original, unoriginal, and a couple of things. Go and have a read of it on the Substack. But yeah, Simon always has a considered reply, and he said Kriegstein and Kurtzman and their descendants, Eddie Campbell and the rest of the fast fiction stalwarts from Ed Pinson and Glenn Dakin onwards. I know he's a big fan. If you go back far enough, you can listen to me and him chatting about Eddie Campbell, and he actually corresponded with Eddie Campbell. They'd sort of write letters, which is lovely back then. Charles Keeping and all the Inkslingers like Stedman or Sienkiewicz and Breccia. Breccia hasn't come up. I think we mentioned Breccia, have we, this episode? I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. With an honourable mention to Gareth Hopkins, Oliver East, Alan Haverhome for keeping me making comics with examples of non-storytelling. That's good. Troy, another great bloke off the slack. I wouldn't even be thinking about writing comics if it wasn't for 2000 AD, especially the 80 strips written by Wagner, Grant, Mills and more. Tarantino, he's quite in the film, and I think Tarantino is a massive influence on comic makers. In the 9 movies he's made, this I think genuinely, sometimes too much of an influence, but sometimes just right enough. And he says music plays a big part for him, specifically artists who wrote lyrics with a social consciousness that criticised the establishment. He quotes Bob Marley, Joe Strummer, Chuck D, Joe Strummer especially for me. Robin Hitchcock's a big one who I take influence from for dialogue sometimes, and I think there's a couple of little strands that came out of this about that sort of anti-establishment punk aesthetic that is more British comics than American comics. I'm going to say you've got that 70s, 80s rebellious thing running through.
So I find that very interesting. I think that's absolutely right, and that's transparent in mine. It's there in yours as well, which is interesting given our
backgrounds.
I mean, we both been authority figures in our careers in different ways, but I would say quite anti-authority as well, and kind of outlook sometimes. But that's the punkish thing for Britain is absolutely there in comics. That it's not really there. I mean, it's there in American comics, but it was different there. It seemed to be alternative.
It just seems
comic.
To be different, doesn't it?
It's not as strong. It's not as visceral as the.
And it's not just outsider comics. It's being an outsider seems somehow to exist. Some of the great comics writers have been seemingly outsiders, in a way. You know, Alan Moore especially, Steve Moore especially, even Pat. You know, Pat sort of is something of what would be called these days a Sigma male, isn't he? You know, he's not aligned. So let's hear. Dave Cranner's stuck some stuff in. Clumped together characters such as Earl Willie, Dennis Menace, and Bash Street Kids. All these characters are little rebels. You like that. Even Roger the Dodger. Sticking to the rebellious theme, 2000 AD, or more specifically, Judge Dredd was the first comic I can remember as an air of realism in the artwork. And then when I grew up, writers such as Garth Ennis, who did Preacher, and Hellblazer, and Warren Ellis. Warren Ellis doesn't get enough love. Fucking, he's great. Frank Miller art for Sin City and stuff. I can definitely see that in Dave's work. Overall, my inspiration comes from a stand against authority and a break from the norm, which is cool. And then there's various other chats. Let's see, just quickly scroll through. Oh, yeah, there's one from Stephen Ingram's, our buddy Stephen. Stylistically, he talks about an influence from the Scottish feel of comics as well, which is interesting. Stylistically, 90s North American indie comics as well were a big influence for the likes of Seth, Daniel Clowes, Chester Brown, Jason, and get some gag strips. One specific book I'd love to capture the atmosphere of doing is The Walking Man by Hiro Taniguchi. That's a great book. I really like that. So I guess the list is a certain kind of 20th century Scottish literature, 90s North American indie comics, and Hiro Taniguchi and or Nick Drake. I didn't want to put Nick Drake for him. Yeah, okay. Matt Schofield.
I like Nick Drake.
Yeah.
Oh, God, it's that album. It's really good.
Matt Schofield. Ben Edlunds, The Tick. Dave Stevens, Kevin Maguire. It's really interesting. Really interesting. That Dan has said Pat Mills, Eric Larson, Jeff Senior. We can almost dial into when he was loving comics, almost, can't we? With that, just those 3 names.
You know the titles.
Yeah.
It's Dragon's Claws and Transformers.
Yeah. Kieran Squires,
actually covers as well for Jeff Senior.
Okay.
Definitely his style.
Kieran Squires, JRJR, Michael Oeming, David Oeming, and John Paul Leon. That's interesting. Okay, interesting. Simon's mentioned Firkin, the cat from Fiesta. He's got a bit of a not safe for work one, which is quite good. I think the final one is Jordan Thomas, who says 70s director Scorsese, Lucas, Coppola, Zero, 2000s comic writers Bendis, Brubaker, Remender. I think that era of writers did have a big, because they talked a lot about writing on things like Word Balloon. We began to really see behind the curtain a lot more for these writers, and Stephen King he quotes as well. Interesting. I think that's it. Yep, that's it. But yeah, thanks everyone for replying. That was very good.
See when you mentioned, like when Simon mentioned Krigstein, so that's over a storytelling point of view, and I've written about this a wee bit in my newsletter. If I know quite a lot, it's talk about the Kurtzman beat.
Yeah.
And the Krigstein rhythm, like the number of panels we'll do in a tier.
Yeah.
which changes the shape, from kind of square to rectangle, kind of in very narrow panels and a kind of statical feel. So that kind of music in the comic page, and Steranko took a lot from Krigstein.
Yeah.
Miller took a
Miller
lot
did.
from
Yeah.
Krigstein too.
Yeah.
I mean, really, really did.
Hmm.
So that's something I've been doing a lot, which is, I guess, the evolution of influences and purposive influences over, the kind of those are your kind of lodestones, or your Mount Rushmore, whatever you want to call it, your North Star that you go towards. I think you've always got to be. I think again the handcuffs thing's really important, is you have to take those off.
Right.
Why hold yourself back? I don't feel the thing I learned from someone like a Bill Sienkiewicz is you don't need to be consistent in every page. You don't need to necessarily stay on model. It's your comic. Do what you want. Change from an impressionistic or cartoon realistic style to abstract expressionism, to surrealism to fucking dadaism, whatever you want to do. Just because at the end of the day, it's about it's about entertaining the reader. It's about telling a story. It's about surprising the reader as well. And one of the things for me that I'm really into is that I love that idea of it's like a David Lynch thing. You just do not know what's going to happen next. It's about building suspense and dread. You are taking the reader to a particular emotional place, and then you pull the rug.
Okay.
I really like. There's a particular things that you can do in a comic to unsettle the reader, and hopefully if you do it right, and I don't know if I've ever managed this, but I've tried to, is you try and get a sense of dread. Like when I did War Underground, that specifically I was trying to do towards the end is you're not going to like where this is going. And there was particular things when I was doing that I thought of was David Fincher's Zodiac had a huge impact on me. Like there's two scenes in that are just they're horrible. And you can't take your eyes off. One is when there's the woman, she's hitchhiking, she gets picked up by the Zodiac killer, and she's got her baby, and then you see the person go down the road and they see the woman wandering, like, oh fuck, where's the baby?
Right.
Where's the baby? It's horrible.
Oh,
and
mate.
she's like,
Hitches
the window.
Yeah.
And it's a true thing that happened. And it's terrific. Another bit when he thinks he's caught the Zodiac killer, and the guy is like, he's asking about the handwriting, and because he's identified the Zodiac killer by the handwriting, and he's down. He said, "Oh, it's the posters. They're down in the basement. Man, I'll show you." Because he thinks this other guy that wrote the posters, and he said, "Oh, tell me, why do you think it's him? What's it? Oh, it's handwriting. The picture said posters," and the guy says, "Oh, but it was me that wrote that."
Right.
And he's in the basement. He's behind him, and you're just like,
yeah.
So kind of thing doing it in comics is it's not so much. I mean, it is everything's difficult in comics to a certain extent until you learn how to do it. But there's a different way of doing things in comics. It's different rules because it doesn't move, or there's no actual sound. It's a representation of sound. Yeah. So they can do something in a film where, like, if you're doing, like, say, Psycho, when Norman Bates starts speaking like his mum. You cannot do that in comics. It's just not effective if you italicize it or something. It's shit. But what you can do is things like the repetition of sound effects, or a particular close-up or a particular composition, and then you repeat it like a rule of three.
Okay.
So it's not quite like Chekhov's gun. It's about the meaning of it. So, for example, this is a crude example. There's this character, like a horrific character in Going Underground, and there's always a sound, like it's a schlup, basically a masturbation sound, and then you hear that sound at the end when they turn around and he's there. And again, it's supposed to be. I mean, some people are like, that's fucking
a lot of comics
shit.
is about Chekhov's gun, isn't it? A lot of comics is about that. It's about that reveal, then later reveal.
Repetition.
Yeah. We did. We talk about that growing dread thing. We did that in Tony Osmond too, where it gets worse and worse, and then they have dinner. And it's just, there's something wrong, and then we get the suicide, and that's that. The geezer says, "Oh, the such and such has escaped," and the dude shoots himself, and I'm like, right, now we can that's built, the
way he was drawing it as well was becoming more. There was rising intensity, and just, do you know the thing is that, because I think that's one thing it's easier to do if it's just one of you doing it.
Maybe,
I think if you're collaborating on it, it's much, much more difficult. because you've got to either the having different ideas leads to better. So conflict leads to a better.
That was the closest
Iron
collaboration.
sharpens iron. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you and Cliff are the two that I'm in contact with the most as we do stuff. As you can imagine, Adam, I just give stuff to him and he comes back a month later and says, "There you go." It's a bit like that. But with you and Cliff, it's like very much anyway. Moving on. So right.
What do you mean though? Do we ask you like why do you want to do it this way? Or
no, we just sort of discuss it. We just discuss scenes and stuff.
I just like talking about comics with
Yeah, I know, man. I'm the same.
That's really it.
I'm the same. Yeah, no. There's never. It's always a joyous thing.
What is the toilet roll thing again? Because you've reminded me. I cannot remember this at all. I know I drew toilet roll in a scene. You were like, take it out. Why was it? I used an insect, but why was it that you got annoyed about it? I'm genuinely just can't remember.
Yeah, so I had a scene of her in the cell, and there was this moment in the cell, and I wanted it to be pensive and quiet and resigned, and you drew a toilet roll. I can't remember what the other things you drew. You inset a couple of things, and in my usual sort of enfant terrible kind of fucking way, I went, "What the fuck have you drawn these for?" And
no, you're right. You're absolutely right. Because I remember.
But I see why you did it. It's just it's just different visions, isn't it? That's the whole thing.
It was to emphasise, that's her life. That's how shit her life is. That's what it's basically.
Yeah.
But from a page design point of view, and from just the kind of, it's taking you. It's halting the storytelling narrative of. All of a sudden it's fun. Do you know what? It's unintentionally funny as well. It's like
I get you. Yeah, it could be seen that way, couldn't it? Could be seen that way.
It's moving the pathos from the scene as well.
And I think that taught me to be more.
Right. I just couldn't remember.
It definitely taught me to be more open to what artists do. There's the way I write.
But you shouldn't have, because you were right.
Well, yeah, but there's always that happy accident, isn't there? With like Cliff's drawing of the testicles getting punched in Tony Osmond 2 was totally him. And I could have easily said, "Well, I don't think this is working," but it massively does. So, yeah, there's
there's something about balls, you and balls and comics, because I was showing you just before we started, like the
not your balls,
the balls drawn that Adam did of your balls.
Oh yeah, you're my two characters. Yeah, I'm quite proud of those characters. Yeah, good.
No, it's great. It pops up a lot. There's weird things in there. I mean, the thing. So I know you're trying to finish this.
That's right. That's right.
Those subliminal themes that come out in your comics. There are things in my. I don't know if everyone notices it, but there's a lot of stuff with father-son relationships.
Okay.
In every comic I've ever done, whether I've written it or not, it's absolutely there. And sometimes it's quite obvious, and sometimes it's not. Going underground, that's something that's very purposeful in there about absent fathers in various different shapes and forms. It's absolutely there in the one I'm working on just now as well.
Well, let's talk a bit about what you're working on. So, what's the next thing you got coming out? Come on, then. That's a good segue.
So it's called The United Five Triangles, which is
the third volume.
So it kind of, isn't it? I would actually describe it more really as a second volume.
Okay.
So it follows on. Well, it follows on from both, because there's characters from the United Welcome to the Shit Show was the first collection I did. Yeah. And then the second with a lot of similar characters in the United going underground, and this is the last one. It's never say never again.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah,
but I do want to do something else after this. I've got different ideas for things, and it draws things to a neat close for me. But I said that last time as well. So there's some characters that come back from Welcome to the Shit Show that I really liked drawing, and I think are just have different voices, and again, it's, I don't know, it sounds wanky, or just weird or insane. It's just they just appeared in the comic, so they appeared in the stories. I just drew them, and it's going really well. So like I said, I'm 87 pages into it. I had planned on it being about 120 pages long, and it's probably going to be about, I don't know, a lot longer than that.
Are you going to separate into 2 volumes, or
no?
Okay.
I just want it done in I had thought about that actually. I could stop it now, and it's a good split. But if I did it now, this is pretty much the first act, and I do quite like the idea of just the kind of difficult self-destructive side of me, which is, is a really big streak in me.
For both of us, man.
Just stopping it and just, people be like, what the fuck? Just going, ha ha.
Yeah.
'Cause I don't think you should explain everything. I think
Yeah.
the reader should figure a lot of stuff out themselves. And that's one thing why Twin Peaks: The Return really frustrated so many people.
Yeah, but I thought it was genius. I heard Mark
any
Frost.
answers, and I have never thought more about.
I heard an interview with Mark Frost today about that last moment.
Really?
And yeah,
Oh, really?
yeah, he was on Front Row
you
a
need to
couple of weeks ago.
off
Yeah.
then,
And he was talking about it. He says that he didn't explain anything, but it was perfection.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
It's the most. And again, but the thing, for me, for something like that, say it was 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I think is similar in a way. You don't have you understand the emotion, and you understand the emotional connection you have to it without understanding the literal meaning. It doesn't matter. It just does, because the Lynch's is realist, it literally doesn't matter. It necessarily doesn't have any meaning. It's how you feel, and I can't, again, Zodiac, Twin Peaks: The Return are two examples of, particularly Twin Peaks, which is meandering, taking you off on huge tangents, red herrings, that comfort, but slowly what it's doing is, like, throughout it, it's just there is this darkness, and the darkness is getting bigger and bigger, and it's spreading. Yeah.
I told you I watched that. I think the last 6 episodes in a row on my own at home.
I was the same. I was just like,
I think it changed my brain chemistry. I genuinely think it fucking changed me.
I totally agree with you as well. It's almost like those last 2 episodes. They're almost like alternate endings. Like, one's like a happy ending, and when you kind of see his face, kind of, it's like it's not real.
And her, it's
just like, that's one interpretation, I suppose. It's
that
just,
moment with her as well just fucking got me.
See when he gets back in time as well, and you're just like, and he's with her, and then she disappears, and it's that feeling of, everything you've been trying so hard for, like, it's whether it's a relationship, a job, and it just slips. It literally slipped through your fingers.
Yeah.
Everything you've been trying for, your life's purpose is gone. You just couldn't do it. And then that horror of, but then you just try and somehow reinvent your life to try and make something better. And again, it's just like, oh man, it's just...
Everyone go watch it. I've rewatched it. I've done the whole series.
I've watched it. I think I've maybe done it 4 times.
Oh, wow, okay.
In the last episode, I've watched it. So that is see the comic Going Underground. That is that ending. That is what I was trying to do.
Okay.
So I changed so I learned from, like, I changed the narration device on it. So shifted to a third-person narrator. So there's no narration all through it. It's like, just kind of, telling the story. And then at the end, it's almost like a kind of storybook. It's, it's kind of written like, Jimmy walks through the door, and you're seeing, like, I did it like in a kind of jigsaw puzzle there, but there's deliberately missing pieces. And that was from, oh fuck, I really want to get this. What's this missing pieces thing, David Lynch and stuff? So I did the same thing with the comic. I'll take panels out so you don't know what's happened.
Okay.
But you're seeing the word balloons, but they don't relate to the panel.
Yeah.
And they're out of sequence because it's like drawings of, like, stuff lying about, but you're hearing them walk through the building, and it's like, what's that smell? What's that noise? And it is supposed to build. I think, to be honest, if I was doing it again now, I would have done it for a few more pages and stretched it out. But the problem is you're trying to keep the reader's attention, and it gets boring. It's just you're trying to unsettle it.
Yeah.
And then you turn the page, and it's just like, that's it.
Yeah.
And then
I think we have to be careful sometimes of worrying what the reader will say about it. I think we sometimes worry a little bit. I mean, there is a consideration. I think sometimes I don't worry about it anymore, but I think at one point I did worry about it. People would say, "What's the backstory of this character?" And yeah, I know. Yeah, good. Anyway, where can people find you? Where can they buy your comics, dude?
So I'm in Cannon Hill Comics, bigcartel.com. My newsletter is on Substack, Johnny Cannon and Comics, because it was just Johnny's Substack, which is like a bit of shit. It took me so long to figure out, how did you change the name of your newsletter? I'm on Instagram under Cannon Hill Comics as well. I'm on Blue Sky and Threads, but I fucking always forget.
Who cares?
I just, do you know, the only thing I do in both is basically just repost peanuts. strip.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
They're so good. Or
Yeah.
comic book historians. Basically, I repost all his stuff because his stuff's really, really good. And
Yeah.
so his book, Understanding Superhero Comic Books, Alex Grand, was really good because he's got a lot of stuff in there where, where Kirby got a lot of his ideas from.
Okay, let's get that then. Yeah.
So it's a really good book. It could maybe be doing a bit of a tighter edit. It's a bit repetitive in places, but it's fantastic. And his YouTube channel's fantastic as well. Your podcast is one place where I've learned an awful lot. It's fantastic.
That's very kind of you.
You really do. You do know you do an excellent.
We've got an interesting one coming out next week. I'll tell you about it in a second with Alan and Eamon. Always who bring the insight. Eamon's is a great podcast. Mega City Book Club's a great.
Mega City Book Club.
Really good.
Never Ran Anything. Cartoonist Kayfabe.
God bless him.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
I know. I really missed that one. Awesome Comics podcast, fantastic.
And Second Date Update, that's good as well.
Oh right, okay. I'm missing one as well.
Word Balloon.
I like deep dives that really get in about it.
Me too.
Talk about the why, not just the. Here's what happens in this comic. I can just read it. Mate.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
If I want to find what happens in a comic, I'll go and read it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, I don't need fucking 3 paragraphs from what happens in this comic. I don't need it. Anyway, thank you, mate. That's very kind of you. Go and listen. Also, you didn't plug it, did you? In full disclosure, your podcast, your ongoing podcast. Where can people find that? It's on Spotify, isn't it?
It's on Spotify in full disclosure. So it's not full disclosure.
No, because that's a legal podcast of some kind.
It's a legal podcast, and I can't stress enough. My podcast is in full disclosure.
Yep. Not
full disclosure. I am not a lawyer. I cannot give legal advice that is trustworthy.
Just emotional advice.
There is emotional. Do you know the thing is? I had to listen through them both when I was editing them and putting the music and stuff in. And what occurred to me was it was basically. Did you ever watch Saint and Greavesy?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
It's basically a couple of Cockney geezers with a token Scottishman who just laughs at everything they say. Oh, Greavesy, you're a funny man. I am Ian St John. I am just the straight man in this.
To be fair, neither of us are Cockneys, but yeah, we'll go with it. Yeah.
Cockney rhyming slang. It's all the same to me.
Good. Right. Well, let's hit the frog and toad, my friend. And thank you to everyone who listened.